Caleb Williams may have the best team around him, and I'm not talking about the Chicago Bears. All right, boys, let's switch things up here. Now, I want to talk about probably my favorite topic to talk about right now, if we're being completely honest, and that is the latest on the greatest new superstar of the NFL, the man that's going to carry the league into the next decade and beyond. I'm, of course, talking about QB1 of the Chicago Bears, Caleb Williams, right now. And gee, we all know that you're beating the drum for Caleb right now, and you're a huge fan too. But no, guys, seriously though, so this past week, Chicago finally signed its two first-round draft picks. They signed number 9 Rome Odunze, as well as number 1 overall Caleb Williams. And the reason I'm talking about it is because there are some articles that have come out this week, and I just think it's absolutely fascinating. Not only how the media is covering this, but also some of the requests that were made by Caleb Williams' team. And a lot of people are making big deals about this, and they're saying he's being a diva. They're saying he's asking for stuff that he shouldn't. They're saying that he's being outlandish. But quite frankly, I think that this guy may have the smartest team around him of any team. And I'm not talking about just the receivers of the Chicago Bears. I'm literally talking about his accountants, his lawyers, his financial advisors, everything that he has. So let's jump into it real quick because I don't know how much attention that y'all are paying to it. And of course, the biggest headline this week of him signing his contract was he requested as part of it a no franchise tag clause. Now this was rejected, but he requested that there be a clause in the contract saying that the Bears could not franchise. Now I'll say this as a Bears fan, that was a little concerning. You know, we got the 5th year option,
Yeah.
but I am concerned because, of course, I want him to be the long term solution here in Chicago. This is not a unique proposal, though. It's the first time I think a rookie has tried to put it into a contract. But that's something that we've seen around the league, whether it's Saquon, whether it's some of these stellar quarterbacks. I think Mahomes even asked for it in his
Yeah.
last contract, and nobody's granted it. But are we going to start seeing this more of this no franchise tag agreement? What do y'all think
Wait,
about that?
so Bubba, nobody's ever granted the no franchise tag.
Not to my knowledge.
And does the collective bargaining allow for you to have no franchise tag in there? Because I
Uh,
thought
uh,
these were the
uh,
type of items that
so
that
apparently the collective bargaining has allowed for the franchise tag, but they're going to allow them to contract out of that. Like the reason that it's always been refused has not been because of collective bargaining. It has been because the teams did not want to give up that power for the investment that they're making in these players. And no one has successfully had the standoff to make sure that they weren't using it yet.
I hate the franchise tag. Look, I do get it, but to me, it's not fair to the player or the team. It's not the way you build trust. It's not the way that you build camaraderie. I'm not a fan of a franchise tag. I think you should get your work done. You should get the contract sorted out. It's a mechanism that just feels cheap. Could you imagine in our work if I get a better offer, I get an opportunity to go over here, and all of a sudden I get slapped with a franchise tag, and I got to stay at this job for another year on a predetermined equation salary? Like it's obsolete. It's a horrible opportunity. This franchise tags. I'm with them on this. I don't want it, but he needs to get that collective bargaining together. They need to get this thing eliminated through and through.
But you say that though, but I mean, we all play fantasy football and we have the keeper tag. Essentially, this is the real life version of the keeper tag for collective bargaining at this point. I don't know, G. What do you think about that franchise tag agreement?
Go back and forth. I mean, if you're a fan of the team and you want to see your guy stick around another year and they can't figure it out and come to terms and big money and big greed and agents get involved in the process and tie it up. I mean, look, there's nothing worse than waiting somebody out through preseason and then now you're 6 games into the season and they haven't showed up. Like that as a fan wrecks everything. So I'm 50-50 on it. Like, look, these guys are making millions and millions and millions of dollars, right? So for them to like have to gut it out with a 15 million, $20 million franchise tag for another year before they get the biggest contract in history, I really don't feel that bad for them. But I do understand too, especially if you get the franchise tags and you've burned all the bridges on that team, and then the management and the coaching staff and they're treating you poorly. That's just a bad, toxic environment. So I mean, I think you got to look at it situation by situation. I don't think you get rid of it completely, but maybe there's some new parameters in place to, I don't know, maybe there's some more player options coming in that.
I mean,
Well,
that's what the team option is. I
yeah,
mean, let's keep in mind that you're getting a 5th-year team option and then a franchise tag. You're really getting 2
Yeah.
team
but
options.
that's only for rookies, and franchise tags apply wherever you want them
Yeah.
to one player. I mean, I think like most interestingly, we saw Cincinnati use it on Tyler Boyd this year. I think, or was it Tyler? Who did they use it? They used it on a player that was like not one of their studs, but someone they wanted to keep because they knew they were going to work it out on other players. So, but I think that's but that's kind of normal. But what was more interesting to me was some of the other requests. And so I think the next request was, and I love this, and I'm going to explain where I'm coming from on this. Williams' team asked that instead of playing Caleb Williams, instead of paying him directly his salary, that it be paid to his LLC, his limited liability corporation. And the reason because of that is in Illinois, LLCs have zero income tax filing requirements at all, meaning that essentially he wouldn't have to pay taxes on his 4-year, $39 million contract. And I have a little familiarity with this, and I think it goes beyond that too. So, as y'all know, I worked in NASCAR for a little bit. I worked with drivers. I helped form a NASCAR team, and so I'm familiar with the contracts of NASCAR. And these drivers in NASCAR all have their own companies, whether it's an LLC or an incorporated. Of course, like one of the most famous, Dale Earnhardt Incorporated DEI, where they incorporate themselves and they get paid for driving the car through their corporation. Well, the other genius of that, of course, is not only are you in a different taxable scale, and in this particular case, you pay no taxes, but also you're going to have better write offs. So you're going to be able, instead of having to pay taxes on that entire 39 million, Caleb was going to have to do, and then pay his agent out of that, his trainers out of that, all the other people, he could just expense all those off. In through his company, he can expense off his living. He can expense off everything else, and it was really, to me, a brilliant tax saving move that was directly turned down by the NFL Players Association. By all accounts, the Bears were perfectly happy to do that as long as he was going to sign. But the NFLPA was the one that turned it down under the collective bargaining agreement. I just thought that it's fascinating to me that it was even a story that he's the first guy to even offer this, especially consideration my familiarity with it from NASCAR, that I couldn't believe NFL players had not. And certainly, this is probably something that he did under NIL rules. And guys, if there are any college football players out there, anybody that you know, and your kid, your player, and you're not having a LLC or an incorporation for purposes of your NIL deal, you're really messing up by not having that from tax purposes, liability purposes. But I'm shocked that he was the first one to do it, or at least the first one to make this demand publicly known, and that we haven't heard about it before. And I think it was a brilliant move by his legal team, his accounting team, to save him the money. And it really shows me also that he's surrounding himself with people. We hear all the horror stories, and I'm beside the tax implications. We hear all the horror stories of these athletes that surround themselves with people that are just, quite frankly, leeches on the system. That they're spending recklessly. That they're, we talk about Harry Ruggs. How did that guy not have a driver employed? How did he not have somebody driving him home that night? Like, and it shows to me the type of team that he's building around him, that it's not just about getting the most money possible, but it's about finding creative ways to preserve his money and to preserve him as an athlete. So, what do y'all think about that? This is probably the first time y'all have even heard of something like this. Like I said, I'm lucky enough to have familiarity through my work in NASCAR, but I think it was a great move by his team, and I think it's interesting that he has put these people around him that are bringing up these interesting issues.
So this is pure definition of when you hear people say for the brand, like that's for
Yeah,
the brand.
one hundred
And
percent.
and
Yeah,
and these days it's not. I think it's a smart move. So let me just get that out there. But these high end elite players that have the spotlight greater than the middle of the pack and the lower of the pack, they are enterprises. I mean, from a social
yeah,
media standpoint to a marketing standpoint, they have to have teams to manage their public affairs, everything. I mean, that takes a crew, and then your security detail, and then think about travel arrangements. So just like you were running a full-time enterprise
Yeah.
business, And then you look at guys like James Harrison in the past, and I think Derrick Henry right now. I mean, these guys are paying up to $250,000 to $500,000 a year just on their bodies to
Yep.
preserve their bodies.
Yep.
So there's teams
Yep.
on teams on teams. And when you have this level of resources and spotlights, everybody in the woodwork's coming to you. So you also have to have a team in place to safeguard against all these deals that are going to come up. So I think in terms of an LLC and having the ability to use that and do that as write-offs instead of personal write-offs, company write-offs, it makes sense. It makes a lot of sense. Um, and I'm actually quite surprised that he's at least one of the first ones that bring this to the spotlight.
Yeah.
There's probably more I don't understand about it, but from
Sure.
initial trust level, it appears to make a lot of sense.
It's absolutely brilliant. And what it does is it levels the playing field for all teams. Like we have seen in the past as players look at different states and where they want to play, and they may not want to go to California because of the tax implications. They may not want to go to New York because of the tax implications. If I'm a football owner, I am getting back around the table with the Players Association saying, we have to make this an option. We have to create this opportunity. This is better for these players. It's better for the teams, and it creates this degree of separation. And of course, we know what's going to happen. The IRS or someone, those 80,000 new agents are going to step in and squash this. But I am shocked this hasn't come up before now. All the brilliant players, all the brilliant teams behind people, and maybe it's been asked, and maybe it just never made the headlines like this one has. This isn't him being a diva. This is him being smart and taking the dollars he's getting and stretching them the furthest. Because, G, you're exactly right. Look, I know people say all the time, all right, $40 million over 4 years. Like, oh, bless his heart. Most of us will never see that kind of money in our lifetime. But when you start looking at what that $40 million, it starts taking down the taxes and agent fees, and then what you have to do to maintain yourself, it gets really small really quickly
Yeah.
in perspective. And
Yeah.
so this LLC provides an opportunity to do all those things and still pay your taxes, but in a mechanism that benefits the players, the support structures, and the teams. But again, as much as the player brought this to the table, every single GM, every single owner should be jumping up, unless you're in one of those low tax states, and saying, we have to provide a pathway forward for this. This is the future of it. It has to be the future of it. And I think everyone comes out a winner in this. So, hey, Players Association, go fight for your players. That doesn't mean that you have to stand up systems and a whole union that has to function just to say it functions. Go find better ways that these guys can keep more of
Well,
their dollars.
but that kind of gets into the issue here, and this is me putting my lawyer hat on here. That does get into the issue, and the reason that it was rejected is, and it was rejected by the NFL play, and this is according to the Yahoo article that I read. So I want to be clear, I have no personal knowledge. This is according to the article I read. But the reason it was rejected was it was rejected by the collective bargaining agreement, essentially, or excuse me, it was there's nothing in the CBA against it. In other words, it's never been addressed. But essentially, the NFL told them that, and it's because in the NFL, players are considered employees. They're not independent contractors, and part of that comes under the fact that there is an NFL Players Association, which is a union. Unions representing employees, unions don't represent independent contractors. And so there is a slippery slope that you're going down here in the fact that if you go away from that union and you make all these guys independent contractors, then that NFL Players Association does not have some of the same collective bargaining power. They are not going to be able to come to a collective bargaining agreement because you have independent contractors, not employees. This could really be the downfall of the union and the downfall of the collective bargaining agreement. So it's an interesting line that has to be walked into, something that I'm interested in just purely from a contractual standpoint as we go forward, because I do think this is the future of the NFL. And we're seeing in other sports and we're seeing other places that you really have the superstars pushing this forward. You have the superstars wanting to protect themselves and to protect other things, and it's really going to be leaving not necessarily the starters. You're not leaving like a Cole Kmet, for instance, who's a pretty good starting tie-in. You're not leaving, you're not leaving Keenan Allen behind. You're not leaving, and give me a guy that's just been a solid player that's a solid starter. I'm trying to think of one. Give me I can't even think of one right now, but like, you're not leaving a guy like that behind. You're not leaving someone who's a solid contributor. But what it goes down to is a guy like the TikTok Isaiah Rochelle, I think is the guy that's like TikTok famous because his wife posts a bunch of stuff. And I think that's the guy's name. My girlfriend watches him all the time. That's the guy that's going to be affected by that. It's a guy that bounces from team to team, practice squad to practice squad. That's good enough to make the league, but not necessarily good enough to have that starting job year after year or something like that. And so the question is, are you going to see the separation of the elite athletes away from that? Or are you going to see? I'll tell you a perfect example. The guy I was thinking, Mercedes Lewis. It's not going to affect Mercedes Lewis, who's entering his 19th season in the NFL, is quite frankly a very, very average tight end. He was once an elite tight end, but now he's a very average tight end. It's not going to affect him, but it's going to affect a guy like Isaiah Rousseau. It's going to affect a guy that bounces from team to team, and it's going to affect that collective bargaining agreement if you start doing that. So I think it's very interesting that it got brought up, and it's very interesting as we've seen the introduction of NIL into college football and all the effects that have. That I think is smart. If I'm advocating for Caleb Williams, I think that this is a brilliant move for Caleb Williams. If I'm advocating for the players union, this would be disastrous. And if I'm advocating for the owners, it depends on what state I'm in. Somebody once told me, and I'm not an accountant, somebody once told me that players that are there on a per game basis. So again, it's not necessarily like a Caleb Williams, but guys that are paid on, depending on how many games they're actually dressed out for, have to actually pay the taxes based upon the state that the game is played in.
Mm.
So if you're a Florida team, so if you're on a per game basis for the Dolphins, let's say, you're doing great because that state has no income tax, right? But the minute you fly to California for a game, you're getting taxed at the California rate, not the Florida rate.
Wow. Wow.
So that's a major hit to your
Yeah.
bottom line at that point. I'll tell you another little quirk. When they refused him after that, and just to show the intelligence of Caleb Williams' team here, he said, "Okay, fine. You're not going to pay me as an LLC. Here's what I want you to do. Instead of you paying me a salary under this 39 million, what I want you to do is make it as a forgivable loan." To where he can defer the taxes for 10 years and they can actually forgive the loan payment. So, in other words, the Bears would be loaning him the money on a 10-year basis, zero interest, that they could then forgive at the end of the 10 years. And I think that's again, quite smart, quite incredible, and an interesting move. And he's got some very creative people around him trying to save this man some money right now. What do y'all think about that? A forgivable loan?
I think that's super interesting. I'll tell you what's happening, and Bob, it's kind of a shame that this isn't out there more, because we hear quite often, tax the rich, do these other things. What Caleb Williams is putting out there front and center is how business works.
Yeah.
And I think that's an education that's worth going through, understanding the risk, understanding the taxes. I mean, but it goes back to what you said, G, is that these aren't employees, they are an enterprise. And because of how this shakes out, he's doing what any business would do. If this was CW Incorporated, this is the same thing that any business, the board goes through, that you're working through. These are the mechanisms. How do I make sure that I can provide for my teams, for what I need to support me? And how do I make sure I've got all of the revenue that I can keep and maximize? I hate the idea of a loan. I get where he's going with that. I don't know. My head bounces all over the place on the practicalities of that, and kind of the slippery slope that, but it's creative. And it goes back to what you said very early on. He has a team that's truly out to protect him. He has a team that is being creative and trying to maximize that Caleb Williams creates generational wealth. And I think everybody, this is not him being a diva. This is something that should be appreciated, should be discussed, and should start maybe challenging some of the norms. And my hope in all this is that we all understand how business works better, because I think it often gets vilified because it's unknown. We don't know how that works. It's not that businesses don't pay taxes. It's not that others are trying to skip on taxes. It's that I'm trying to not pay unnecessary taxes. How do I pay what really is a fair share of this? Because I've got a lot of expense to make this thing worthwhile. And if I get nickel and dimed all along the way, That's not me being able to provide for my family and for my future generations. That's me supplementing $1 trillion budget of government funding.
And there's so many hands in the pot trying to take what is yours, right, beyond just government entities, and you as a person are trying to set generational wealth and legacy. I mean, so I get it, but I think you're going to see more and more of this because we are just now on the frontier of NIL deals. But as these things continue, you're going to have players that are well versed with their own corporate finance teams, and they are, as you mentioned earlier, or at least they should be, LLC for those NIL deals because those
Yeah.
are endorsement deals, or that's where the collective money is being funneled. But they're going to, in some states, that started in high school. So you're going to have, in some instances, 5 to 6 years worth of an LLC that's existing that are going to be multi-million-dollar enterprises. And it's only just going to be natural that that enterprise continues as their employment in the National Football League or professional arena, whatever sport that they go into. And so I think you're going to see more and more of this because there are people that are going to start finding the loopholes in this, and I think that's going to have impact because you're going from just an era of these kids probably getting paid under the table at the college level to now they're going to have full blown enterprise businesses, LLCs that are for the brand that are being drafted, and that's going to be a larger conversation. So,
Hey, gee, I want
Well,
clarity. You say for the brand, but you say it a little angrily. Do you like for the brand, or you got a little chip on the shoulder for the brand?
just jealous that I didn't have for the brand. Not that my brand would have been of value when I was doing, but look, hey,
nonsense, G.
there's so many opportunities these days for an economy in the creator economy and the digital economy. But think about it. Every one of these athletes, just for being who they
Yeah.
are monetized on social media platforms. All they got to do is take a picture of them getting out of bed, brushing their teeth. It's going to hit 1 million views, and they're going to get paid off of that. So they have many sources of revenue that they can take advantage of if they are smart. But I say for the brand because it's more than just him playing football. Now it's everything. You have to look at these guys and manage them just like you would any large brand and how they manage their marketing, advertising, finances, legal teams. Like it gets overwhelming very quickly, and all the kid wants to do is just sling the ball.
Yeah.
Well, and it's even more interesting coming out of the original rumors that Caleb's team was going to demand that he get a percentage of whatever NFL team he goes to. Hey, Chicago, perfect opportunity. If this guy becomes a legend, let's let him incorporate. He can become a subsidiary of the Chicago Bears. I mean, I think that's the solution. But I got to tell you guys, I'm just really impressed. And I think what it comes down to is I'm incredibly impressed by his team. I'm incredibly impressed by the fact that they're somewhat thinking outside the box, that they're not just doing it like every other agent is doing it in the game, that they're not just doing it. And I think that's a message out there to say, hey, there's one way that everybody does it, but it's not wrong to explore other options. And it's not wrong to look into other facts. And I think he's done a well job of this. Most importantly, this discussion really wasn't about Caleb Williams. I love Caleb Williams. I can't wait until he starts for the Bears and for at least 4 weeks until he does terrible. And once again, we're crying over a new Bears quarterback that just hasn't succeeded. I'm excited for Caleb Williams, but what I'm more excited for is I just think that it's incredible that people are looking at new ways of looking at these contracts. They're going to have widespread implications. And it's something that I just think we got to keep our eye on because NIL kind of snuck up on everybody. NIL wasn't there, and then the next day it was the Wild West, and nobody knew how to do it right. You've got people just throwing stuff out, throwing so many crazy dollars at college football players now that some college football players are making more money in college than they would in the NFL. And so you've got to look at that. You've got to look going forward at what's the next step for the NFL, what's going to happen. How is the NFL Players Association gonna react to this? How is everybody gonna adapt? I think I heard of one player in the offseason. I can't think of who it is right now that asked if he could be paid in Bitcoin.
I don't recommend that.
Bitcoin had a good week. It's so you just never know. It could go up and down. There's some, who knows? You might see Jordan Love in his next contract demand asked to be paid in Packer stock. It's going to be really interesting as we go forward as this league evolves. And I think this is the forefront, one of the early discussions that we're having this conversation today, and people are calling Caleb Williams' tactics very odd, when in just a matter of a few years we're going to see it as the norm. And I think it's going to be a great thing to track. And guys, I certainly appreciate y'all letting me talk to two businessmen, talk to a branding expert in you, Graham, and an economic development expert in you, Jansen, and me just be a lawyer geeking out over contract law right here and talking about how someone's doing great things. And guys, if you're an NIL player out there, hey, my phone line is open, by the way. So, no, I think it's wonderful. Caleb Williams is showing that not only is he the next generation of the NFL at quarterback, but he is the next generation of player as it comes to protecting himself, protecting his brand, and protecting those around him. And for that, I am excited.
And CTT fans, let's get G monetized. It's not too late, G. We can build the brand. We can get this old offensive lineman out there. Come on, fans.
So somebody get this man in with Jack's. Can we get this man a Jack's gift card? Can we get this man a Jack's gift card? He just wants a bologna biscuit every morning.
I thought it was a Milo's. I thought it was Milo's, man.
You go Milo's.
Purple onion.
Yeah, we can go PO. Yeah. Hey, last thing I'll say here. Good on the Bears. I mean, good on the Bears. I know we talked about all the just bringing on the negotiating tactics and a good team around Caleb Williams, but good on the Bears. I mean, nothing worse than to get out of all these crazy deals that they would have committed to an unproven guy that's going to be out in game 2. You gave him 4. I gave him game 2. He's not the future. He's done. Michigan fans, join the bandwagon with everybody that hates me. Caleb Williams fans, let's go.
Skol Vikings.
Oh my God. All right. Well, look, we're going to talk more about this over the years.
Bubba said, I did like this session. This
until
was
then,
great.
until then, bear down, baby. Bear down.
Out.